Well, welcome back to Jews, News, and Views. You're on the Balagan Connection right now. I'm DaviD TaL, and we have our good guest friend here.
Rob Schwartz.
Well, Schwartz.
Or David for you and your audience, Raphael Ben Yehuda.
All right, I
As
like
my
that.
as my bar mitzvah certificate, which I recently found.
Okay, so
It
so you're a son of Judah.
apparently so.
That's cool,
Who
and
knew?
you're got a angel name, which is kind of cool. So
Yes.
yes, and today we're going to be talking about Jews who have come over here when I say over here to the United States for all kinds of reasons. A quick reminder: I'm from Israel, I'm living in LA right now. Rob is in the States. You grew up where?
Southern California, Orange County, Long Beach area.
There you go.
Not far from the beach, near the beach towns of Seal Beach, Huntington Beach, all that, Long Beach as well. So
So can I
it's
call you a surfer Jew?
I did a little body surfing in high school. That was about it.
So we missed the surfing part here.
Yeah.
But I like the dynamic of this because there's a couple of things that only talking to another Jew would kind of make sense. And I think this is really kind of interesting to share this with somebody who comes with the same historical cultural background as I, even though we didn't grow up in the same area. And one of the things that I've been watching lately is the whole Oscar dynamic. And I didn't watch the whole Oscar show, but I did watch a couple of pieces. And one of the things that came up very, very quickly is that there's a lot of Jews in the Oscars. And it turns out that there have been a lot of Jews in the Oscars down through the history ever since the beginning of Hollywood. And even in this day and age, we had one Wonder Woman, Israeli Jewish woman, actually being part of the presentation. She was part of one of the presenters for the Oscars. We had a Jew who actually took the Oscar for the best documentary, and we'll talk about that. And we had a Jew who took the Oscar for the best, I think, male performance or the best lead performance. And we can talk about all of that. But I think what's very interesting is the connections between all of this. So let's start off with did you watch the Oscars? I mean, how did
I
you go
did
through it?
I did not. I did
So
not.
you didn't miss this. Um, let's start off with the beginning. The whole Hollywood dynamic, the whole Hollywood backdrop is basically a Jewish show.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. A lot of Do you remember a guy named Dave Chappelle, the comedian?
Yes, yes.
A number of years ago, he did a monologue on Saturday Night Live, and he was talking about the Jews in Hollywood. And I wrote an article about it, and I really ought to get that out there somewhere because it was the article. Dave Chappelle, I think, is a brilliant comedian. That he's black means that he brings a lot of the cultural stuff into his work. And if I were going to compare him to anybody, his incisive wit and ability to turn a phrase is like a guy named George Carlin. I mean, the two of them would have been. I'm sure they probably knew each other at some point. But
Isn't
Dave
Dave
Chappelle,
Chappelle the one that went off against the trans movement at some
well,
point?
he's been in that and the gays and the whole nine yards. But this was the time where Kanye West wanted to go. What did he say? DEFCON 3 on the Jews or something a few years ago. So Dave Chappelle got up there and said, "Boy, I tell you, it kind of disturbed him, and he was worried, what it meant, and all that." But he says, "I got to say something." He says, "I've been to Hollywood, and there's a lot of Jews in Hollywood." And he goes, "I mean a lot." And he goes off on this whole thing, right? And he says, "There's two words that you can never say together: the Jews." And I thought, this guy is right at the edge.
He got it.
You got that creative talent, then you can slip right off the cliff into hardcore anti-Semitism. I sent that video to all the Jewish people I knew, especially those Messianic Jewish believers, as well as Christians that I knew that are part of the Messianic movement. And every one of them came back and said it was an anti-Semitic rant. I thought it was brilliant, but I understood where they were coming from. So I started thinking, well, what does this mean? There's a lot of Jews in Hollywood. I went back And if I may share something with you, David, I have a book on my bookshelf. I got a number of different history books on the Jews. This book here by Paul Johnson, History of the Jews, is a great book. And it has about a 5-page section in one of the chapters here dealing with the development, the invention and development of Hollywood as well as Broadway.
Yeah.
And it turns out there were a lot of European Polish Jews that came over from Europe in the late 1800s and began to develop the Broadway.
Oh, I had to stress something.
Yeah,
That's
go
my
ahead.
story. That's my family story.
Okay, well there you go.
Okay,
Right? Yeah,
Eastern European Jews. I
yeah.
mean, and,
Mine
and
too. Mine too.
put a visual on it.
Yep.
If you saw Fiddler on the Roof, and the last scene in Fiddler on the Roof, Tuvia is putting his family on a cart, and they're all going off to, I think he said Chicago. They got an uncle in
Yep.
Chicago.
Right.
In my
Right.
case, they had an uncle in Baltimore.
Yep.
Okay, and again, the whole getting on a boat in Europe, coming across, sailing under the Statue of Liberty, getting DDT'd on their heads on Ellis Island,
Right.
and starting the life in America.
Yep.
So it turns out that all of these Jews actually who spread throughout America, some of them made their way to Hollywood.
A lot of them ended up in New York to start, developed a lot of the Broadway infrastructure there. And then as time went on, according to Johnson's book, they started inventing things, cinematography equipment and sound equipment. And then they got into the networks, setting up like CBS and setting up NBC and all of that. And so, RCA. And so as they developed the industry, many of them moved out to California and started the Hollywood industry. And of course, originally it was silent films, and you had a whole lot of Jewish influence there. I think we mentioned 8 different of the original 100+ studios here, consolidated down to 8 major ones, all run by Jewish
I, I
men.
I got to read out the names. I mean, anybody who
Oh,
knows anything about Hollywood. I mean, if we
go
just
ahead.
went over this,
Yeah,
I've got Universal, I've got 20th Century Fox, I've got Paramount, I've got MGM, I've got Columbia. I mean, all of these are studios, and the more famous, the Warner Brothers. I mean, Bugs Bunny must be, by the way, also created by a Jew. I mean, you couldn't help it.
he had the New York accent. He had the smart aleck sort of, thing going on there, and you kind of wonder, and there are a lot of the writers. By the way, I met Mel Blanc years ago,
Okay.
the voice behind Bugs Bunny,
All right.
and the guy had like hundreds of voices he could do, and he was a character, but he was all part of that generation going back to the 20s and 30s.
So again, I can't help label this like this. And the Oscar goes to the Jews.
Seems
And
like
basically, and even this last Oscar, and the reason I'm kind of coming up here and bringing all this is because uh, Jews played a role in the last Oscar nominations or ceremony, like we saw. And I'm going to start off with a female woman, actually a Wonder Woman named Gal Gadot, who is one of the presenters of the Oscars, and we'll talk about her in a moment. She plays the evil witch in the new Snow White movie. I don't know if you know that.
I had heard.
And here's the weird thing. What they did is they gave the role of Snow White to a young Colombian actress, and they stood together on the stage, and you can't help but ask, who's the most beautiful of them all? And Gal took it big time.
Yeah.
But we'll get back to Gal in a minute, but I want to stress two more things. Number one, the Oscar the Oscar award for best documentary went to a Jewish Palestinian cooperation of a movie about what they called the occupied areas, about somebody who lived in a village on the southern part of Judea, and that was achieved the best documentary movie. And the two people who actually created the film, I think his name is Bassem Abel, I think if I remember correctly, Bassel Adra and Yuval Avraham is the Israeli, came up to, give their speech for the award. Now, Bassel got up Arab, Palestinian, lives on squatted land in part of Judea. And again, it's not occupied territory. I'm going to call it disputed territory. And turn that into a movie, turn that into something that, he's going to become famous for, and explains that he doesn't want his daughter to live under occupation, and he doesn't this, and he doesn't believe in the ethnic cleansing. And I can understand that. But then Yuval Avraham gets up, Israeli. He looks like an Israeli. He talks with an Israeli accent and basically throws his people under the bus. And in the greatest stage in the world, I mean, standing on the stage created by these Jews that we now just talked about, on an industry created by the Jews that played such an amazing role in what the United States of America has become, he basically really stated that he doesn't believe that that Palestinians should be treated like that. He believes that he's free, but his friend Bassem is not. And he did mention the hostages, but only in a side way. And basically the movie itself. And by the way, I checked out his social media. The movie itself, him, are totally anti-Semitic. And I can't help but say, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, how come the Jews are such in the forefront of this? And how come we have so much anti-Semitism in the world today? And every time they can, okay, you're going to get these anti-Semitic Jews, these anti-Jewish Jews on the stage throwing, dirt at their own people for what we're basically doing. And it really did turn my stomach.
You know, David, this sounds like an old story, and I've heard this, and I know you've heard this too, that all the Arabs have to do to destroy Israel is leave the Jews alone, right? Because we'll fight amongst ourselves, and you can see it. We were October 7th, and I'm sorry, to me, in my mind, everything goes back to that right now. It seems like all the world's events, everything, October 7th seems to be a flashpoint, if I might use that term. And where I'm going with this is that you had a lot of internal strife in the country. Now, an American Jew, I'm watching from a distance. I'm reading news reports. I'm watching, but there's no war. So it's just internal stuff. And you figure there's always going to be internal stuff going on. What I didn't realize was the Arabs were watching it too. And they realized at that point, Israel had split itself down the middle. And between the left and the right in Israel, it's no different than the left and right here, except for maybe because it's a smaller country and emotions run a lot harder because you've got a sworn enemy not more than a few miles from your border, and you never know when they're going to blow up. You just don't know. How many wars have been fought against Gaza in the last 10 years? 4 wars?
Four or
Five
five
wars?
wars.
To the point where you know that every couple of years after the rearm, they start provoking Israel. And at some point in time, Israel was going to respond. And this was the one that caused Israel to, some people believe, go over the top. I don't think they went over the top enough, but that's another story. But the point of all that is when you've got division within the homeland, the enemy is going to strike. And that's what happened. And now I understand, even though there's still some division in the country, it's a lot closer than it was. People that were on the left on October 6th woke up on October 7th and realized that all the hard work they had done and thought the reconciliation they had tried to bring together just simply wasn't working. Their enemy across the border didn't care how nice they were, how many visits they made, how often they sent them to doctors, tried to take care of their families and everything. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was death and destruction to Israel. And
And
that's
and
where we are
again,
today.
but here's the weird thing. What I'm trying to tie in right now is the Jews among us that are against us.
I
And
agree. Yeah, that's the
and
biggest
just
issue. Yep.
watching him on the screen, and I'm saying, wait a minute. And you know how many times you've probably been asked, why did the Jews support Biden? Why don't the Jews support Trump? Why do the Jews vote against, Israel? Why don't a lot of the Jews support Israel? And one of the things I tend to say is, wait a minute, I'm not surprised because we've been doing this down through the ages. I mean, think about Cain and Abel. I mean, they couldn't reach an agreement and started off with the first, murder in history. Think about Moses coming off the mountain and they're dancing around the golden calf, if you remember, or different events where Jews. I mean, think about Joseph. His brothers literally threw him into the pit.
Yeah.
Okay, and couldn't believe we've been hating ourselves as much as anybody else has been hating us down to the ages. If you know anything about the conquest of Jerusalem by the Romans in 71 AD, Josephus tells us that one of the reasons that we lost Jerusalem to the Romans is because of the infighting between the Jews. And again, look at Israel's politics today. And you see how much infighting we are, like you said, our own worst enemy. But one of the things that I found fascinating in trying to understand, where this dynamic comes from is if you are a special people, if you are God's chosen people, then you've got a role to play. And not everybody wants to play the role. And again, my classic example is the PK, the pastor's kids, who were born as the pastor's kids, but they didn't ask to be a pastor's kid. They didn't ask to be in the limelight. They didn't ask to be expected. They didn't ask to be held up to different standards than everybody else. They wanted to be kids just like everybody else. So one of the ways to deal with I don't want to be a pastor's kid is okay, going out against the pastor and his family. And Jews have been doing because they don't want the role that God has put us in. And one way to kick at it is to kick at the Jews. Classic example, Niture Karta. Every time Iran has a press conference, they've got rabbinic Jews with the side curls standing up with signs that says that Zionism is not Judaism. And again, we're fighting this fight. But like you said, the 7th of October has been a watershed moment for all of us Jews.
It's changed everything. It's funny you mentioned that. We used to call them here self-loathing Jews or self-hating Jews, and it's heartbreaking because Judaism is a very as a religion, and this is one of the things I was going to say. It's inclusive. It wants to love everybody, and I think this general liberal left leaning progressive mindset in at least in the United States, and I think it's really universal. We've always tried to stick up for the downtrodden. In the civil rights movement, it's known the ACLU was started by Jews. The the Jewish lawyers and the Jewish apologists, if you want to call it that, marched alongside of the Martin Luther Kings in the 60s. They were the ones that defended him in court and did everything they could to further the civil rights movement. And there was a time where the American blacks and the American Jews were very close. And the unfortunate reality is that started separating in the late 60s and early 70s. So what we're left with here is old loyalties that don't necessarily make any sense today, although I understand that we still have to be. And didn't God say, I think it's in the book of Deuteronomy, you were a stranger in a strange land,
Yes.
therefore you've got to be kind to the stranger. And so I am sensitive to that. But when that stranger comes with a gun aimed at your family's head, you have to defend your family.
You just now touched something that kind of clicked
Am I
Bill.
crazy?
Yeah, well, no, but where was the separation between the Jews and the blacks? And here's one of the things, and what I want to tie into again, go back to what we talked about in the beginning: Hollywood being created by these Jews who came here with nothing, some of them dirt poor, and started off an industry that has changed the world. I think the separation, the breakoff point, is when victimhood became an asset, and the blacks endorsed the victimhood dynamic. Jews have never endorsed victimhood down through the ages. That's one of the reasons that we have, even though we are the ultimate victimized people, we've never endorsed, we've never waived our victimhood in the way that other people do. And that brings me to what I do want to bring up because me and you both watched a very prominent Jewish Israeli woman, actually a Wonder Woman, for lack of a better word. And we know her as Gal Gadot, who has been relatively quiet over the last couple of months about what's happening
Yep.
after what happened after Gaza. And
Yep.
she was part of the Oscars this time. This is what kind of brings it all together. But she had something to say that I think needs to be heard. And what I'm going to try to do, if everything works all right, is put her on the screen and we're going to listen together to her. And if you want to stop and pause and remark, we're going to do that along the way. So, ladies and gentlemen, if this goes according to plan, this is, wait a minute, sorry. This is, I got to share this like this and share and bring it up. And this is Gal Gadot. And this is what she had to say a couple of days ago. Isn't she beautiful?
Yeah. Can you bring up the? I can't hear the volume here.
And I'm Jewish.
Does this help?
I'll say it again. My name is Gal.
Yep. I think so.
I just have tears in my eyes. Just listen to her say that.
Yep.
Just expressing such a simple fact about who I am feels like a controversial statement. But sadly, this is where we're at.
Yes.
I grew up in Rosh Hashanah in the center of Israel. My mother was the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Her father, my grandfather, he rest in peace, was born in what was then Czechoslovakia. He was the only one in his family who survived. His father died fighting for the Czech army when the Nazis invaded, and his mother and brother were murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. He came to Israel with nothing and built a life for himself. And despite the wars he endured, he always taught me the values of love, compassion, and tolerance.
And that right there is the mission statement of the Jewish people.
It's amazing. I mean, she's a celebrity. She's, I think, an A-level or B-level celebrity. I don't know how that works
Oh,
in
A-level.
this.
She's definitely on. Yeah.
But here's the weird thing. Israel is small enough. I've actually met Gal because after she became Miss Israel, she was served in the military, became Miss Israel. She actually was part of an organization that went to visit sick children in hospitals. And sadly, I had a nephew who had cancer and was in the hospital for almost a year. And we were spending time, with him in the hospital. And I got to meet her a couple of times when she came to visit him. A couple of times. Very, very interesting. And as opposed to what a lot of people think, she is a wonderful woman. She's a wonderful human being. I mean, with all of her celebrity. But what she's doing here is what we all as Jews do. We have our heritage. We have our family. We have our history. And that becomes a part of who we are. And I think that is kind of fascinating.
Let me add something, David. No, as Messianic believers, we have a biblical perspective on all of this, where most people and most Jewish people will maybe divert into the culture, the fact that Israel was established within the mandate of the British mandate in the 20s from the League of Nations, and later, in a sense, created, if you want to call it that, by the United Nations, which that's another whole discussion we can have at some point. But what really hits me here as believers, I see the people, if you want to use the term, the religion, just for the sake of argument here.
Rob, hold on a minute. Waze is about to close on us, so we're going to stop here a minute.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to put another one up, and I think we're going to have to wait about 5 minutes or 6 minutes and reconnect from where we are right now.
All right, I've got 9 minutes left on my screen.
Well, it's just now telling me, you're right. Sorry.
You want to keep going?
Let's keep going.
Can you edit
Let's
that?
keep going.
Okay. So to me, you cannot separate the people from the land, from God, and from the language and the culture, if you want to throw that in together. The Jewish people belong in that land. It was given to them. In a sense, you might want to call them tenants or renters. But the fact is that that's where God puts it's his footstool. And the problem is that as believers, we have this biblical side, which the world does not necessarily accept. Even within, and I don't want to bash Christianity, but even in many circles within Christianity, they don't understand that close relationship. You can't pull the people out of the land and separate them from God and the language.
But that's what anti-Semitism is trying to do, including that movie that took the Oscar for best documentary, is trying to disassociate the Jews from the land.
Yep.
And it's wonderful what she's doing. We don't have a lot of time, so let's hear a little bit more of her.
Go ahead.
If they don't win anything with anger. On my family, on my father's side, I'm the 8th generation to be born in the land of Israel.
That's amazing.
And that's who we are.
Yep.
Was the very first chemist in the Chalet Tzedek Hospital. But very proud of both sides of my family. And they show the two sides of Israel. On the one hand, a country that provided a life raft for refugees fleeing the horrors of persecution, pogroms, and the Holocaust.
I heard a very interesting discussion about the fact that the 7th of October was a modern-day pogrom.
Yep.
And for those of you, a quick one. Do you want to give a quick explanation what a pogrom is, or what it was, and why it kind of carries such a weight for us?
These were organized attempts by either local peasantry in Europe or even by the government to kill, maim, and just harass the Jews in Europe. And it happened for hundreds and hundreds of years. The Nazi Holocaust in World War II, it was considered the greatest of the pogroms. And then this particular event on the 7th of October, and you might want to say everything that's extended past that, with the wars in Lebanon and the wars with Gaza, have continued the history of pogroms. This was the worst one on October 7th since World War II. It was a killing of between 12 and 1,300 Jews. It was the worst and the most Jewish people killed since the Holocaust ended in 1945.
And the state of Israel was created in order for us not to have to suffer more pogroms. That's the whole idea.
Sure. A homeland, eventually the homeland for the Jewish people, which we believe is the mandate. I mean, that's just part of our history. But, most of the world doesn't accept that.
Let's get another piece of Gal.
The free homeland of the Jewish people, where our roots run deep and where we are an indigenous people.
Finally, somebody on a main stage is saying it.
Yep.
To be an Israeli, and I'm proud to be Jewish. But this is the time when many of us in the Jewish community have had to find our voice and confront the hatred against us, even if it's extremely uncomfortable. That's been the case for all of us in every walk of life and every profession, including my own. I never wanted to talk about politics. Try. No one wants to hear celebrities talking about political issues, right?
Right.
So,
sometimes you're forced.
as a citizen of the world, an equal among equals. I'm Israeli, of course, and I knew that anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hate existed. And like all of us, sometimes I caught a whiff of it. But I never thought of myself as being where I came from. It was an aspect of who I am, but it didn't define.
Interesting point.
October 7th happened.
Yep.
And everything sent.
Yep.
Never did I imagine that we would witness such a day of such death and destruction of Jews in our life. And never did I imagine that on the streets of the United States, different cities around the world, we would see people not condemning Hamas, but celebrating, justifying, and cheering on a massacre of Jews.
Yep. And that's where we are today.
Say that this was a wake-up call.
She's almost at tears.
Yep.
I'm almost at tears.
Yeah. This, you notice her, she's in black,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a fitting, it's like a tuxedo almost. I mean, she's got this, there's a speaking authority behind this.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm glad she's stepping up and standing up. This is what we need to be doing, is not being afraid to let our voices out there.
We're going to lose this in about a minute.
Yep.
Should we continue or should we?
I think we can, let's wrap this up and then let's do a second one.
Okay.
Maybe we can use this as a start and then move into some other stuff. This is a really important topic.
So we're going to wrap this up more or less here because there's a lot more that we need to talk about, and
Yep.
and I'm going to have to do some work on this. But basically, how does this make you feel as a Jew, watching her on this kind of stage?
I go both. I mean, I can't express anything else other than pride, in a way that we're standing up for ourselves, and she is, based on all that she's done and her visibility, it's important for the Jewish community to make it stand. So I'm glad that we've got this kind of a spokesperson out there.
Yes, and just to finish this off, if you know anybody Jewish and you understand these kind of feelings, reach out to them.
Yes.
Send a hand. Tell them you support who they are and what they are, and you love them because of your connection to the Jewish people, your connection to your Jewish heritage that comes to you, whether you're Jewish or not, through the Old Testament and through the New Testament. And I think that's fascinating.
Completely agree, David.
So we're going to call it here, and we're going to continue this topic in different ways. Rob, I want to say thank you. Like I said, next week, me and Chrissy are going to be in Israel. We're heading out to Israel, so pray for us.
Absolutely.
And this is DaviD TaL. This is the Balagan Connection. This is Rob Schwartz. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.